In this lecture, I will be giving you an overview of the 3 letters that the Apostle John wrote. First up, his first letter. A little bit about John. We know quite a bit about him if you think back to what you read in the Gospels. We know that John was a fisherman from Galilee. We also know that he was one of the sons of thunder. This was a nickname that him and his brother James had inherited. We also know that he was within the inner circle of Jesus' disciples. So Jesus had the 12 disciples, but James and John and Peter were they were kind of the inner circle. They were the closer friends of Jesus. John was the only disciple to not be martyred, and we don't know this for sure, but it seems to be the case that he was likely the youngest disciple and lived the longest. So John wrote his first letter to a Christian community, most likely in Asia, and the date is quite a bit later than many of the other New Testament epistles. It is somewhere in between 85 and 95 AD. So the reason he is writing this first letter is that false teachers had begun to creep into the churches that John was ministering in. So you can see this common theme throughout many of the epistles that the New Testament author is writing to address an issue that has been creeping into the church. So same thing here, but what had happened was the false teachers had departed from the church, but had taken some of the members with them. So the members had decided that what the false teachers had to say, they believed in, and so they went away with them. So as a result, the remaining church members were feeling maybe some doubt about the truth and were obviously shaken up from the events that had happened. And so John writes this first letter to assure the members of the certainty of their faith and the truth of the gospel, and then also refute the false teachings that the teachers were spreading. So first, the primary theme that he writes about is about true fellowship with God. And as he writes about this, he gives 3 characteristics that point to a person being in true fellowship with God. And so those are love for other believers, obedience to God's command, and the belief that Jesus is the Christ. And so he lays out these characteristics and then compares those to the characteristics that the false teachers exhibited. And he shows that it doesn't really match up, that the false teachers do not seem to be of God. And so from that, he goes into a rejection of what the false teachers are saying and of the false teachers themselves, encouraging the church members to hold fast to the truth and realize the true character of those that had come into the church. So, unlike some of the other epistles, we know quite a bit about some characteristics of the teachings that had crept into the church. First, these people believed that you were not saved or you did not experience salvation due to a belief in Jesus, but rather this happened through a special initiation into their cult. So it involved special rituals where they were then accepted into the cult and granted salvation. Another thing that they believed is that the material world was evil and only the spiritual world was good. And this sounds strange, but it led to some really interesting implications for that, because they believed that if the material world and the spiritual world were separate, then it didn't matter how they lived in the flesh, in their human bodies. So this led to a lot of just living however they pleased, having the idea that anything that they did in the body could not relate to their spirituality. And then a couple other things they believed was that Jesus did not take on a true human form, and his death did not pay the penalty for sins. So they believed that Jesus had come only in spirit. He only appeared to be human, but wasn't really. And so, due to this, there was no way that he could have paid the penalty for sins. So, that tells a little bit about 1 Peter. Now getting on to his second and third letters, these were shorter and they share a lot of the same themes. So, just the background information, 2nd John was written to, as John says, the chosen lady and her children. And this is most likely referencing a church in Asia, but we don't know for certain that it's the same church or one of the same churches that he wrote his first letter to. And then 3rd John is written specifically to a church leader in a church in Asia, but once again, still a lot of not any clarity on whether this is related to the first letter, the recipients of the first letter that John wrote. The date is, once again, pretty late, 85 to 90 AD. So his reason for writing these two, it's mostly centered around traveling teachers. So once again, as with the first letter, it was about false teachers. And these are just a little bit more general, but just about being careful to remain faithful to the teachings of the gospel that they've heard from John, and just to be wary of what they hear from traveling teachers, to know what the truth is so that you can be able to identify when someone is teaching something that is false. And so that's a little bit about 2nd John, and then 3rd John is maybe even a little more vague, and it's just more about problems that can arise when traveling teachers come into the area. So the key themes then, as has been the case for many of these epistles, the key themes are to stay faithful to the truth of the gospel, and then to be discerning about the traveling teachers. So these false teachers were once again denying that Jesus was both fully God and fully man, and so John refutes that claim in this letter. So that pretty much sums up these 3 short letters, and now you should be good to go.